Your position is no longer essential, he said with that smug tech bro calm people use right before they walk into traffic wearing VR goggles. My name's Michael Thompson, I'm 58, and I've been doing this security clearance work for 6 years now after 22 years with the agency. The CEO across from me, Preston Wade, gave me that empty smile he practiced in mirrors and investor pitches. Behind him, Linda Foster from HR blinked like a hostage reading off a ransom note. The whole room smelled like vanilla air freshener and bad decisions. I didn't say a word, just adjusted my cufflinks once, set my security badge on the table like a poker chip, and waited for the thank you they'd rehearsed. Preston launched into some corporate eulogy about shifting priorities and competitive landscapes, which translates to some McKinsey consultant told me, "You're expensive." I nodded, polite as hell. Let the man keep his dignity while he signed his own termination notice. He thought he was cutting operational overhead. What he didn't realize was that I held the facility security clearance, the federal authorization that literally kept this defense contractor in business. No clearance holder, no classified contracts, no company. But sure, Preston, let's call this streamlining. On the surface, I looked calm, professional. The quiet guy in the corner office who never caused trouble, but inside, it wasn't anger or betrayal. It was that operational click you feel when all the intelligence pieces align and you see the complete threat assessment. How deeply, profoundly compromised they were about to become. See, there's something about defense compliance that corporate types never understand. You can't just fire the keystone and expect the arch to stay up. There are protocols, federal regulations. And while Preston spent his days courting investors with buzzwords and organic lunch meetings, I was the one quietly maintaining our facility clearance, managing federal liaison relationships, ensuring every classified document stood between us and a catastrophic security violation. Oh, and before I forget, if you like stories where corporate arrogance meets federal law enforcement, you might want to stick around. This gets interesting fast. Back to the office, they escorted me out like I might steal staplers or cause a scene, as if I needed to raise my voice. I signed the exit paperwork, nodded to the security guard who couldn't make eye contact, and walked out without looking back. No drama, no speeches. Just me, my clearance, and one last email I sent from my personal phone before the system locked me out. Subject line was simple. FSO termination notification, immediate effect. I copied the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency per protocol. Included the date and time my security responsibilities ended. Attached the signed SF-328 form, hit send. Closed the phone, they thought it was over. What Preston didn't grasp was that paperwork doesn't negotiate. That single notification triggered an automatic facility clearance review. Without a designated replacement FSO holding current TS/SCI authorization, every classified contract they'd touched since my termination became a federal compliance violation. But hey, I'm just a former employee. What do I know about operational security? I drove home slow, letting the radio talk about traffic and weather while my brain processed the timeline. Preston had maybe 48 hours before the system caught up with his decision. The Defense Counterintelligence Agency doesn't send friendly reminders. They send investigators at home. I sat in my kitchen with coffee, not angry or vindictive, just still. There's a certain operational calm that settles over you when you know a storm is coming and you're not the one who has to weather it. They wanted efficiency. They were about to discover what happens when security infrastructure vanishes entirely. My wife, Catherine, came home around 6, still in her scrubs from the hospital. "How was the meeting?" she asked. Already reading my expression, "I'm unemployed," I said, "effective immediately." She paused, setting down her keys. "They're lost," she said, "which is why I married a woman who understands systems and consequences." 20 years in anesthesiology teaches you that small mistakes have big results. Preston thinks he eliminated redundancy, I told her. What he actually did was eliminate the only person standing between his company and federal investigation. She poured herself coffee and sat across from me. How long before they realize, Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, the system doesn't sleep, and it doesn't make exceptions? Catherine nodded. In her world, you can't fake credentials or bluff your way through procedures. The body doesn't care about your PowerPoint presentation when the monitor starts beeping. What happens to the people who work there? The ones with actual clearances will find other jobs. The corporate types. I adjusted my cufflinks again. They're about to learn the difference between disruption and destruction. That night, I called our son Andrew at college, just to check in, see how classes were going. Didn't mention the job situation. Kid's got enough to worry about with organic chemistry and his girlfriend's drama. Besides, Catherine's practice was doing well and I had 6 months of severance. We'd be fine. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already started getting phone calls. Word travels fast in the defense contractor world, especially when someone with my background suddenly becomes available. 3 different FSOs had reached out before dinner, wondering if I was interested in consulting work. In our business, reputation matters more than corporate titles, and mine was about to get a significant upgrade. Monday morning, I made eggs Benedict while Catherine got ready for surgery. Normal routine, except I didn't have anywhere to be. It felt strange at first, then oddly liberating. No rushed commute, no meaningless meetings, no pretending to care about quarterly metrics. Around 10, I got a text from Gary Mitchell, an old CIA colleague who now ran security for a Raytheon subsidiary. Heard about Preston's brilliant cost-cutting move. You available for lunch? We met at a quiet place in McLean, the kind of restaurant where half the customers had security clearances and the other half were probably foreign intelligence officers pretending to be tourists. Gary was already seated, reading a newspaper like it was 1987, so he said without looking up, "How long before Preston's shop implodes?" System review started when I filed the termination notice. Federal response depends on how quickly they realize nobody's manning the clearance desk. Gary folded his paper. And how quickly is that? I adjusted my cufflinks. Tomorrow, if their IT is functioning. Wednesday, if they're running on pure bureaucratic momentum. Good, Gary said. Because I've got a consulting contract you might be interested in. 6 months, facility security oversight for a new classified program. Full rate plus expenses. The terms were generous. More than generous, actually, but that's how it works in our world. Competence is rare, and when someone proves they understand the system better than the people trying to game it, word gets around. I'll think about it. I told him which in intelligence speak means send me the paperwork. By Tuesday morning, the first cracks were showing at Preston's operation. It started with emails bouncing back from federal liaisons, delivery failures, authentication errors, messages marked sender not verified, facility clearance pending review. Jordan Pierce, the 27-year-old McKinsey consultant they designated as my interim replacement, told everyone it was probably a server issue. Kid had an MBA and a confident handshake, but he didn't have security clearance, didn't understand that federal systems don't glitch, they shut down. I heard about it from Lisa Park, a contracts administrator who'd worked there 8 years. She called me around noon, voice tight with controlled panic. "Michael, something's wrong with our system access. Half our vendor communications are bouncing back. Jordan keeps saying it's temporary, but," she paused. "Is this what you expected? How's Jordan handling the situation?" He's scheduled a meeting for Thursday to assess the technical difficulties. Meanwhile, procurement is dead in the water Thursday. The kid thought he had time to schedule meetings about a federal compliance violation, like calling a staff meeting to discuss the building being on fire. "Lisa," I said, "update your resume today." By Tuesday afternoon, vendors weren't just having email problems, they'd stopped releasing materials entirely. Purchase orders hung in administrative limbo. One long-term contractor sent a brief, lawyered message. "Until facility security status is verified, all shipments remain suspended pending compliance review." Translation: "We know you're compromised, and we're not going down with your ship." Meanwhile, Jordan kept floating around the office like a graduate student looking for his advisor. "I'm still getting oriented to the systems," he told the finance director. When asked about the DD Form 254 security classification guide, he said, "That's definitely on my priority list." The man had no clearance, no training, and no comprehension that federal compliance operates on binary logic. You're either authorized or you're not. There's no grace period for learning curves. Wednesday brought the first hard rejections. Not polite delays or technical difficulties, but formal denials stamped across contract submissions like court documents. FSO verification failed. Submission terminated. Do not resubmit without proper authorization. It landed in legal's inbox at 8:45 a.m. By 9:10, every department head had been copied. By 9:25, someone finally asked the question they should have posed Monday: who exactly is our current facility security officer? The conference room went silent. You could hear the air conditioning cycling and someone's phone buzzing on the table. Jordan looked up from his quinoa salad like a tourist who just realized he was on the wrong bus. I assumed. I've been reviewing the transition materials. Maybe there's some paperwork pending? That's when the real panic started. Because FSO designation isn't pending or assumed or maybe. It's a federal requirement backed by criminal law. You either hold valid authorization or you don't, and they didn't. Legal pulled up the official record in JPAS, the Joint Personnel Adjudication System that tracks security clearances. The screen showed exactly what I'd expected: no current facility security officer listed, no designated authority, no valid oversight since my termination notification went live. I wasn't just the last person to hold the position. According to their own documentation, I was the only person who'd ever been authorized at the required classification level. They'd built their entire classified operation around a single point of failure, then eliminated that point and expected everything to keep running. The CFO, a nervous man named Dennis Walsh, started pulling financial reports. What he found made the room even quieter. Without an active FSO designation, the security codes tied to classified labor contracts were automatically invalidated. Payment authorizations locked. Project funding frozen. You can't pay cleared employees for classified work without valid contracts. You can't maintain valid contracts without an FSO, and they didn't have either. How much exposure are we talking about? Preston asked, first time he'd spoken since the meeting started. Dennis consulted his laptop. Immediate impact about $4.2 million in suspended billings. If this extends past week 1, we're looking at 12 to 15 million in voided contracts. 15 million, the number hung in the air like smoke from an electrical fire. There has to be a process for emergency designation, Preston said. Some kind of expedited authorization. Linda from legal cleared her throat. Emergency FSO appointments require existing facility clearance in good standing. Ours was revoked when Michael's termination notice processed through DCSA. So fix it, make some calls. This is a bureaucratic error, sir, Linda said carefully. This isn't an error, it's compliance. Michael filed his termination notification exactly per protocol. We failed to designate a qualified successor within the mandatory timeline. The facility clearance lapsed automatically. Preston stared at her like she'd started speaking Mandarin. In his world, problems got solved with phone calls and leverage. But federal security compliance doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about quarterly earnings or investor relations or urgent business needs. It cares about protocols, and they'd violated every one. Get me Michael's contact information, he said. Finally, sir. That would be inappropriate. He's a former employee, and reaching out could be construed as, I don't care about appropriate. I care about not losing $15 million. But it was already too late for phone calls, because Wednesday afternoon, the federal response escalated beyond bounced emails and suspended contracts. The Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency doesn't just monitor facility clearances, they investigate violations. And when a defense contractor with classified programs suddenly operates without proper security oversight, that triggers automatic review protocols. I was having dinner with Catherine when Gary called. Your old shop just got flagged for federal investigation. DCSA received the termination notification and cross-referenced it with active contract databases. Found about 6 different compliance violations. How bad? Bad enough that they're sending a team Friday morning. Not auditors, Michael. Investigators? Catherine looked up from her salad. I covered the phone. Preston's about to have a very educational week. Any chance they'll try to bring you back as emergency FSO? Gary asked. Can't reinstate a terminated clearance holder without complete review process. That's minimum 90 days, assuming no complications, and with complications, 6 months to never, depending on how badly they've compromised operational security since Monday. After Gary hung up, Catherine and I sat in comfortable silence. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening routines. Kids playing in yards, people walking dogs, the normal rhythm of suburban life continuing while a defense contractor learned the cost of treating federal compliance like a budget line item. Feel bad for the employees? She asked. I adjusted my cufflinks. The ones with real clearances will land somewhere better. The others, I shrugged. Sometimes you learn the hard way that certain things aren't optional. Thursday morning brought what I can only describe as controlled corporate hysteria. Jordan had called an emergency meeting to address the technical challenges we're experiencing with federal communications. The entire leadership team crammed into the main conference room, everyone talking at once until Preston walked in looking like he'd aged 5 years since Monday. Status report, he said, not bothering to sit down. Jordan stood up with his laptop, still believing this was a problem he could PowerPoint his way through. We've identified several system integration issues affecting our vendor communications and contract processing workflows. I've prepared a timeline for resolution, Jordan. Dennis interrupted. We're not dealing with system integration issues. We're dealing with federal law enforcement. The room went dead quiet. Jordan blinked twice, his confident MBA smile flickering like a bad light bulb. I don't understand, he said. The Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency is sending investigators tomorrow morning, Linda explained. This isn't a technical problem. It's a compliance violation. Jordan looked around the table like someone had started speaking in code. But I've been handling the security oversight functions. I've reviewed the procedures. You've reviewed what? Preston's voice was flat, dangerous. The transition materials? The FSO documentation. I mean, there's a learning curve, but Jordan, Linda said gently, do you hold a security clearance? Long pause. You could hear the air conditioning and someone's stomach growling. I assumed that was part of the onboarding process, Jordan said finally. Preston closed his eyes, opened them, closed them again. When he spoke, his voice was barely controlled. You assumed. You've been telling everyone you're handling security oversight, and you assumed you'd get clearance eventually? The HR materials said pending authorization. I thought, get out. Jordan looked confused. Should I prepare a briefing for the investigators? Maybe explain our transition timeline, get out of this building. Security will escort you, and that was the end of Jordan's consulting career. Kid walked out looking like he'd been hit by a truck, still clutching his laptop and probably wondering how pending authorization had turned into unemployment. But firing Jordan didn't solve anything. If anything, it made their situation worse because now they had zero security oversight instead of incompetent security oversight. The real crisis started when clients began calling. Not angry calls or demanding explanations, but something worse. Polite, professional notifications that they were reassessing partnership arrangements pending clarity on facility status. Translation: we're dropping you before this disaster spreads to our operations. Hawthorne Systems, their biggest prime contractor, sent a formal letter terminating 3 subcontract agreements worth $8.2 million, effective immediately. No appeals process, no negotiation period, just thank you for your service. Please return all classified materials within 48 hours. Other clients followed. Quiet, efficient separations that felt more like surgical procedures than business decisions. By Thursday afternoon, Preston's company had lost 60% of their classified work portfolio. The employees started figuring it out around lunchtime. Whispered conversations in hallways, people checking job boards on their phones, cleared personnel quietly reaching out to their networks. When you work in the defense sector long enough, you develop an instinct for when the ship is taking on water. I heard about most of this through back channels. Former colleagues, vendor contacts, people who'd worked with me for years and wanted to know if I was aware of the situation. Word travels fast in our community, especially when someone makes a spectacular mistake. They're asking if you'd consider coming back as emergency FSO. Gary told me Thursday evening, unofficial inquiries through intermediaries. Can't be done. Once the termination notice processes through DCSA, you can't just reverse it. They'd need to restart my entire clearance from scratch. How long would that take? Minimum 6 months for TS-SCI with polygraph, assuming no complications. And with complications, I adjusted my cufflinks. Preston burned that bridge when he fired me Monday morning. Federal investigators don't like instability in personnel security. What about consulting? Temporary oversight while they rebuild? Gary, they don't have facility clearance anymore. I can't consult for a company that's not authorized to handle classified material, so they're finished, unless they want to compete for unclassified government work with every other Beltway consulting firm, and Preston's not built for that market. Thursday night, I got a call from someone I didn't expect, Lisa Park, the contracts administrator who'd warned me about the email problems. Michael, I wanted to thank you. For what? Warning me to update my resume. I got an offer from Lockheed Martin. Same position, 20% pay increase, full benefits transfer. Good for you, Lisa. You're smart to move now. Half the cleared staff is jumping ship. The writing's on the wall. She was right. In the defense contractor world, cleared employees are valuable commodities. When a company loses its facility authorization, the smart people don't wait around hoping for miracles. They move to organizations that understand the value of proper security oversight. What about the people who don't have clearances, I asked. That's the sad part. Finance, HR, most of the administrative staff, they're stuck. Can't transfer their experience to other defense contractors without clearances, and Preston's not exactly going to be a stellar reference. Friday morning, they arrived exactly on schedule. 2 federal investigators in unremarkable sedans, dressed like accountants who'd forgotten to smile. No sirens, no dramatic entrances, just the kind of methodical professionalism that makes conference rooms go silent. I wasn't there to see it, obviously, but I knew exactly how it would go. They'd check in with reception, present their credentials, and request immediate access to all facility security documentation. Standard DCSA investigation protocol. Preston met them in his corner office, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows that had always made him feel important. Now those windows probably felt like a fishbowl. The lead investigator opened a leather portfolio and removed a single document. Mr. Wade, we're here regarding your facility's security clearance status. Specifically, the termination of your designated facility security officer without proper succession planning. Preston tried to explain about efficiency initiatives and transition periods. The investigators listened politely, took notes, and then asked the question that ended the conversation. Who is currently authorized to oversee classified material at this facility? Dead silence, because the answer was nobody, and everybody in that room knew it. Sir, the second investigator said, we need to inform you that this facility is now under formal investigation for security violations. All classified work must cease immediately pending review. And just like that, Preston's company went from defense contractor to expensive office space with a compliance problem. The investigation moved with the efficiency of a system that had handled this scenario before. Within 2 hours, federal agents had documented every security violation, cataloged every compliance failure, and effectively shut down Preston's operation as a defense contractor. The technical term was facility clearance revocation pending administrative review, but in practical terms, it meant game over. No appeals process, no grace period, no second chances. When you violate federal security protocols, the government doesn't negotiate. It disconnects you from the system permanently. By Friday afternoon, Preston was making desperate phone calls to anyone who might have influence with federal agencies. Former colleagues, political contacts, expensive consultants who promised they could navigate the regulatory environment. None of it mattered. DCSA operates on procedures, not connections, and their procedures were crystal clear. Monday morning brought the formal notification. A single-page letter on official letterhead, polite and final. Facility clearance permanently revoked. All classified material must be returned within 72 hours. Appeals may be submitted through established administrative channels. Those administrative channels, incidentally, had an average processing time of 18 months and a success rate approaching 0. Preston's company wasn't suspended or under review. It was finished as a defense contractor. The layoff started Tuesday. Not the cleared employees, they'd already found new positions, but the administrative staff, the corporate overhead Preston had been so eager to protect. 60 people lost their jobs because their CEO couldn't distinguish between cutting costs and cutting arteries. I watched it unfold with the detached interest of someone observing a traffic accident from a safe distance. No satisfaction, no vindication, just the quiet confirmation that systems work exactly as designed when you understand their parameters. Preston tried one last corporate maneuver. At an emergency board meeting, he suggested the company had been blindsided by an overly rigid interpretation of federal guidelines. Implied that perhaps I'd been negligent in my transition planning, that the security protocols were unnecessarily complex. That's when Linda from legal produced the documentation, every form I'd filed, every notification I'd sent, every protocol I'd followed exactly as specified. My termination process had been textbook perfect, which was precisely why it had triggered such comprehensive consequences. Mr. Thompson's departure was handled in full compliance with federal requirements, she told the board. He followed every procedure, notified every agency, and documented every step. The fault lies entirely with our failure to designate a qualified successor. The board voted unanimously. Preston submitted his resignation that afternoon. Meanwhile, I was signing a consulting contract with Gary's organization. 6 months, full rate plus expenses, helping them establish security protocols for a new classified program. The work was interesting, the team was professional, and the client actually understood the value of proper oversight. Ironic, isn't it? Gary said over lunch. Preston fires you to cut costs, and now he's out of business while you're making 40% more money. I adjusted my cufflinks. Not ironic. Predictable. He treated federal compliance like a corporate policy instead of recognizing it as the foundation his business was built on. Any regrets about how it played out? About following proper procedures when I was terminated? None. About not warning him what would happen. I considered that. Gary, I spent 6 years explaining security requirements to people who thought they were bureaucratic suggestions. Preston made it clear that expertise was overhead and experience was expensive. Why would he listen to a warning from someone he just fired for being non-essential? The truth is, I hadn't caused Preston's downfall. I'd simply stopped preventing it. For 6 years, I'd been the firewall between his ignorance and federal law. When he removed that protection, the system did exactly what systems do. It enforced its rules without regard for personalities or financial pressure. 3 months later, I ran into Dennis Walsh, the former CFO at a Starbucks in McLean. He was wearing a polo shirt instead of a suit, looking like a man who'd discovered that LinkedIn job searches take longer than expected. Michael, he said, attempting a smile that didn't quite work. How are you doing? Well, you still networking? It's a challenging market for senior finance people without security clearances. We talked for a few minutes about nothing important. He didn't ask what had really happened, and I didn't volunteer explanations. Some lessons are too expensive to learn twice. 6 months after Preston's company folded, I finished the Raytheon consulting project and accepted a permanent position as senior compliance advisor for a consortium of defense contractors. Better salary, excellent benefits, and the quiet satisfaction of working with people who understood that security isn't a cost center. It's the reason the lights stay on. Catherine and I celebrated by taking Andrew to dinner at his favorite restaurant near campus. Kid was doing well in his engineering program, had no idea how close his tuition payments had come to being interrupted by corporate stupidity. "So what exactly happened to your old company?" he asked over dessert. "They confused efficiency with effectiveness," I told him. "Thought they could eliminate the person who understood their most critical system and replace him with someone cheaper, and that didn't work." Andrew, in any complex system, there are people whose job looks simple from the outside but is actually holding everything together. When you remove those people to save money, you usually discover they were the best investment you ever made. He nodded like he understood, though I suspected the full lesson wouldn't sink in until he'd been working for a few years and seen his own examples of management genius in action. That's the thing about experience. It's expensive to acquire and impossible to fake. Preston learned that lesson at a cost of $15 million and 60 jobs. But hey, at least he hit his quarterly efficiency targets. Look, if you're watching this and you're in management, here's what I want you to understand. That quiet person in the corner who makes sure your systems actually work, the one who never causes drama but somehow everything runs smoother when they're around. That person isn't overhead, they're infrastructure. And infrastructure failures don't announce themselves with PowerPoints and transition timelines. They just stop working, usually at the worst possible moment. So before you decide someone's non-essential, maybe take 5 minutes to understand what would actually happen if they weren't there. Because sometimes the most expensive mistake you can make is the one that saves money.